The altar was where dreams came to die, and as Sorrel stood before the gathered nobility in her borrowed white gown, she knew her execution was about to begin. Not a physical death. Something worse. The groom beside her, Lord Corwin of House Brayworth, hadn't looked at her once during the entire ceremony. His jaw was clenched. His scent reeked of disgust he barely concealed. She'd known this marriage was a transaction, an alliance between desperate houses, but she'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that duty might become something softer with time. Then the priest asked the question that would end everything. Do you, Lord Corwin, take this woman as your mate, your bond, your eternal— No. The word cracked through the cathedral like thunder. Corwin turned to face the crowd, his voice rising with righteous fury. I will not bind myself to a hollow. I will not condemn my bloodline to her curse. Gasps rippled through the pews. Sorrel felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. Somehow, he knew. She has no wolf, Corwin declared, pointing at her like she was something rotting. She is empty, cursed. Any alpha foolish enough to claim her will watch his own wolf wither and die. The whispers became a roar. Hollow. Mate killer. Cursed creature. Sorrel's stepmother, Margot, was already backing toward the door, pretending not to know her. Her stepsister, Bryony, watched with something between pity and satisfaction. This was it. The end of everything. Then a voice cut through the chaos. I'll take her. The crowd fell silent. Every head turned toward the back of the cathedral, where a figure rose from the shadows of the last pew. He was tall, or impossibly tall. Pale hair fell past his shoulders like winter frost, and his eyes were the gray of storm clouds before lightning strikes. Cold, ancient, absolutely merciless. The Alpha King of Valdrin, Cale Thorn, the most powerful shifter in the known world. He walked down the aisle as if he owned the cathedral, the kingdom, the very air they breathed. The crowd parted before him like water before a blade. He stopped directly in front of Sorrel. She's mine now, Corwin sputtered. Your Majesty, you don't understand what she is. I understand perfectly. Cale's voice was ice, which is why I want her. He extended his hand to Sorrel, and despite every instinct screaming at her to run, she took it. His skin was cold, deathly cold, as if winter lived beneath his flesh. I will marry you, he said quietly, for her ears alone. I will protect you. I will give you everything you need. His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. But understand this. I will never love you. That is the one thing I cannot give. Sorrel stared into those storm-gray eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Pain. I understand, she whispered. Neither of them knew how impossible that vow would be to keep. The Cathedral of Ashford had been decorated for a celebration. White roses climbed the ancient stone pillars. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the faces of 300 guests. The air smelled of incense and anticipation. It smelled like hope. Sorrel had almost let herself believe it. She stood at the altar in a gown that had belonged to her mother, the silk yellowed with age but still beautiful. Her stepmother had wanted to burn it years ago, but Sorrel had hidden it, preserved it, dreamed of this moment when she would wear it and finally become someone worth keeping. 23 years old and already passed between 3 failed betrothals. Each time, the truth had emerged. Each time, she'd been sent back to her stepmother's house in disgrace. No wolf, they whispered. Hollow creature. Her own father had died when her wolf failed to emerge at 16. At least, that's what Margot claimed. Sorrel suspected the truth was far darker, but she had no proof. Only the memory of her father's frightened eyes the night before he'd been found dead in his study. Now she was here, at what should have been her salvation. Lord Corwin Brayworth wasn't handsome, wasn't kind, wasn't anything she would have chosen for herself. But he was titled, and his house needed the Ashford lands, and his mother had assured Margot that he didn't care about the rumors. Lies. All lies. Sorrel had seen the disgust in his eyes from the moment they'd met, had smelled the revulsion beneath his false courtesy. But she'd told herself it didn't matter. Once they were bonded, once she proved she could be a good wife, surely. No. The word shattered everything. She watched Corwin turn to the crowd, watched his face twist with performative outrage, and understood with horrible clarity that this had been planned. He'd never intended to marry her. This public rejection was the point, a spectacle, a warning to anyone else who might consider taking the hollow bride. "She has no wolf," he announced, and the cathedral erupted. Sorrel stood frozen at the altar. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The faces of the crowd blurred into a mass of judgment and horror, mouths moving, fingers pointing, but she heard nothing except the roaring in her own ears. This was worse than the other rejections. Those had been private, quiet. This was annihilation. She searched the crowd for her family, found her stepmother Margot already halfway to the door, face composed in careful denial. Found her stepsister Bryony watching from the third pew, beautiful as always, her expression carefully neutral. No one would help her. No one ever had. "The marriage is void," Corwin declared. "I demand this creature be removed from my presence and returned to whatever hole she crawled from." The priest looked helplessly between them. The guards at the door shifted uncertainly, awaiting orders. And then, "I'll take her." The voice came from the back of the cathedral, deep, cold, commanding in a way that made every wolf in the room immediately submit. Sorrel's head snapped toward the sound. She hadn't noticed him when she'd walked down the aisle. He'd been sitting in the last pew, shrouded in shadow, just another guest at a wedding he had no reason to attend. But now he stood, and she understood why she'd missed him. He wasn't just a guest. He was a predator who had been hiding his presence, dampening his aura, watching from the darkness like a wolf waiting to strike. Alpha King Cale Thorn of Valdren. Sorrel had heard stories. Everyone had. The king who never smiled. The ruler whose territory stretched across 3 mountain ranges and 2 great forests. The Alpha whose power was so immense that other kings paid tribute rather than risk his displeasure. The king who, at 34, remained unmated despite a decade of princesses and noblewomen throwing themselves at his feet. He walked toward her now, and the crowd parted like the sea before a storm. Up close, he was terrifying. Beautiful in the way a glacier was beautiful, all sharp edges and frozen depths, and the promise of destruction. His skin was pale, almost bloodless. His eyes were the gray of winter skies, and when he stopped before her, she felt cold radiating from him like he'd been carved from ice. "Your Majesty?" Corwin stammered, dropping into an awkward bow. "This woman is cursed. She's a hollow. Surely you don't want—" "I know exactly what she is." Cale's gaze never left Sorrel's face. "That's precisely why I'm claiming her." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Confusion. Disbelief. Why would the most powerful alpha in existence want the most worthless omega? Sorrel didn't understand either. She stared up at him, searching his face for mockery, for cruelty, for some hint of the trap this had to be. She found nothing. His expression was as empty as a frozen lake. "You're making a mistake," Corwin insisted, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. He'd clearly expected to humiliate her completely, and now his performance was being upstaged. "The hollow curse is not your concern." Kyle extended his hand to Sorrel. "Come." It wasn't a request. Sorrel looked at his hand, at the pale, elegant fingers, at the ring bearing the seal of Valdren, a snarling wolf wreathed in frost. She could refuse. She could stay here, face the consequences, let Margot sell her to whoever would take damaged goods. Or she could go with this cold, terrifying king who wanted her for reasons she couldn't fathom. She took his hand. His touch was ice. Not metaphorically, actually, physically cold, like gripping snow. She flinched but didn't pull away. Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "She's mine now," he announced to the stunned cathedral. "Any challenge to this claim will be considered an act of war against Valdrin." No one challenged, no one dared. He led her down the aisle, past the gaping nobles, past her horrified stepmother, past her silent stepsister. His grip on her hand remained firm and frozen. At the cathedral doors, a carriage waited. Black lacquer trimmed with silver. 4 massive horses with coats the color of midnight. Cale handed her inside, then followed, settling on the seat across from her. The door closed. The carriage began to move. And Sorrel found herself alone with the Alpha King who had just claimed her life. "You're wondering why?" he said. It wasn't a question. Sorrel's heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes, Your Majesty. You'll learn in time." He leaned back against the velvet seat, and for just a moment she saw exhaustion flicker across his features. Deep exhaustion, the kind that lived in bones and never quite left. "For now, all you need to know is that our marriage will be contractual, formal. You will be queen, but in title only." "I don't understand." Those gray eyes met hers, and Sorrel saw something vast and old and desperately tired behind them. "You will," he said quietly. "And when you do, you'll wish you'd never taken my hand." The carriage rolled on through the fading daylight, carrying her toward a kingdom she'd never seen and a fate she couldn't imagine. Behind her, her old life crumbled to ash. Ahead, something far more dangerous waited. The journey to Valdrin took 3 days. Sorrel spent most of it alone in the carriage. Kyle rode alongside on a gray stallion that seemed as cold and remote as its master, appearing only at night to check on her briefly before disappearing to wherever kings went when they didn't want to be found. She told herself she was grateful for the solitude. Time to think, time to prepare. But preparation required understanding, and she understood nothing about what was happening to her. The landscapes changed as they traveled north. The gentle green hills of Ashford gave way to darker forests, then to mountains capped with snow even in midsummer. The air grew colder, the sky grew grayer. By the 3rd morning, frost clung to the carriage windows. "We'll arrive within the hour." Cale's voice came from outside. "You should prepare yourself." Sorrel peered through the frosted glass and felt her breath catch. The castle rose from the mountainside like something from a fever dream. Black stone towers clawed at the heavy sky. Walls thick as fortresses surrounded courtyards that had never known summer. Banners bearing the Valdrin wolf snapped in a wind that cut like knives. It was beautiful, terrible, completely alien to anything she'd known. The carriage passed through the outer gates, then the inner ones, finally stopping in a courtyard of dark cobblestones. Servants appeared instantly, forming neat lines on either side of the carriage door. Cale dismounted and opened the door himself, offering his hand. Sorrel took it. Still cold, still impossibly cold. "Welcome to Valdrin," he said. His tone suggested the words meant nothing to him, just another formality to endure. She followed him into the castle, her thin cloak doing nothing against the chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The servants bowed as they passed. Their eyes flickered with curiosity but no cruelty. She'd expected sneers. She'd expected whispers of hollow following her through the halls. Instead, she got quiet efficiency and careful neutrality. They stopped before a heavy wooden door carved with wolves running through a frozen forest. "These are your chambers," Cale said. "The servants will attend to whatever you need. A seamstress will arrive tomorrow to fit you for appropriate clothing." His gaze dropped briefly to her mother's gown, now wrinkled and travel-worn. Burn that when you're done with it. It carries the scent of your old house. No. The word came out before she could stop it. Kale's eyes narrowed slightly. No. Fear clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to continue. This gown belonged to my mother. It's all I have left of her. I won't destroy it. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, so slight she almost missed it, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Nothing so warm. But something. Very well, he said. Keep your ghosts if they comfort you. He turned to leave and panic seized her. Wait! She grabbed his sleeve, then immediately released it, horrified at her own boldness. Please, I need to understand. Why did you choose me? What do you want from me? Kyle paused but didn't turn around. I require an heir, he said flatly. Eventually. But beyond that, I require nothing from you except discretion. Discretion about what? Now he did turn, and the look in his eyes made her step back. I told you in the carriage that you would understand in time. He moved closer, and the cold that surrounded him intensified until she could see her breath misting between them. But since you insist, here are my terms. He spoke as if reciting a contract, which she supposed he was. You will be my queen in name and title. You will have access to the treasury, the servants, the libraries, anything you desire. You will attend formal events at my side when diplomacy requires it. Perhaps 3 or 4 times a year. And beyond that? Beyond that, and we will not share a life. His voice didn't waver. We will not share meals. We will not share conversation. When the time comes to produce an heir, we will manage it efficiently. But I will not pretend affection I cannot feel. I will not offer companionship I am not capable of giving. Sorrel absorbed this, trying to understand. You're saying you won't love me. I'm saying I can't. Something shifted in his expression. Pain, quickly suppressed. Love requires a capacity I no longer possess. You'll understand when you know me better. Or rather, you'll understand when you realize that knowing me is impossible. Why choose a wife at all then? Because I need an heir. And because you... He stopped, seeming to catch himself before revealing too much. Because a hollow mate cannot be harmed by what I am. You have nothing inside you for me to destroy. The words should have stung. Instead, they landed strangely, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. What are you? She whispered. Kyle's jaw tightened. Ask that question again in a month. If you still want to know, I'll tell you. He walked away, his footsteps echoing on the cold stone. Your Majesty, she called after him. He stopped, but didn't turn. Thank you, Sorrel said, for taking me away from there. Whatever your reasons, whatever this arrangement truly is, it's better than what I was facing. So thank you. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Don't thank me yet, he said finally. You haven't seen what you've married into. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadowed corridor like frost dissolving in morning light. Sorrel stood alone before her new chambers, the cold seeping through her gown and into her bones. He couldn't love her. Fine. She hadn't expected love. He would barely see her. Fine. She was used to being invisible, but there was something he wasn't telling her. Something about himself. About why he'd really chosen her. About what haunted those ancient gray eyes. She would find out. She had nothing left to lose. The council chamber was colder than anywhere else in the castle, which was saying something. Sorrel sat in a high-backed chair at a long obsidian table, trying not to shiver visibly. Across from her, 3 advisors in dark robes reviewed documents with expressions of careful neutrality. At the head of the table, Kale presided like a statue carved from ice. The marriage contract, the eldest advisor announced. sliding a thick sheaf of parchment toward her. His Majesty has outlined the terms. We'll review them formally for the record. Sorrel glanced at Kale, but his face revealed nothing. It never did. Term 1. The advisor continued. The marriage is binding and cannot be dissolved except by death. The Queen will receive full protection under the laws of Valdrin and will be granted all titles, honors, and privileges befitting her station. Fair enough. Standard language. Term 2. The Queen will receive a personal allowance of 10,000 gold marks annually to be spent at her discretion without oversight or approval. Sorrel blinked. That was more money than her stepmother's entire estate generated in a decade. Term 3. The Queen will be provided with a staff of servants chosen specifically for their discretion. The advisor paused meaningfully. His Majesty has authorized the employment of servants who are either mute, sworn to silence under magical binding, or otherwise unable to speak of what they observe within the Queen's private chambers. Something cold that had nothing to do with temperature slid down Sorrel's spine. He was protecting her secret. Even now, without her asking, he was ensuring that whatever happened in private would never become public knowledge. Term 4. The advisor pressed on. The Queen will provide an heir to the throne of Valdrin within the first 5 years of marriage. The specifics of how this is to be accomplished will be determined privately between His Majesty and the Queen. Heat crept up Sorrel's neck despite the cold. 5 years. That seemed both terrifyingly soon and absurdly generous given the clinical nature of everything else. Term 5. His Majesty and the Queen will not share living quarters. They will not take meals together except during formal occasions. They will not... The advisor hesitated, something flickering in his watery eyes. They will not share affection, companionship, or any expectation of emotional connection. Sorrel kept her face composed. This was what he'd promised. What she'd agreed to. Why did hearing it spoken aloud make her chest ache? Term 6, and final. The advisor set down the parchment. Under no circumstances will the Queen make any attempt to discover, investigate, or interfere with His Majesty's private condition. Any breach of this term will result in immediate dissolution of the marriage and the Queen's return to her family of origin. Private condition. Sorrel's eyes snapped to Kale. He met her gaze without flinching, without explaining, without offering anything at all. Do you accept these terms? The advisor asked. Before Sorrel could respond, the chamber doors burst open. This farce ends now. Margot swept into the room like a storm made flesh. Her dark hair was immaculate, her traveling cloak pristine despite 3 days of hard riding. Behind her, looking far less confident, came Bryony. Lady Ashford, the advisor said stiffly, you were not invited to these proceedings. I don't need an invitation to stop my stepdaughter from making the worst mistake of her life. Margot fixed her cold gaze on Kale. Your Majesty, I must respectfully inform you that you've been deceived. This woman is damaged goods, broken, worthless. Whatever she's promised you, whatever claims she's made, they're lies. She's made no claims, Kyle said, his voice dangerously soft. She's made no promises. She stood in your wretched cathedral and let your chosen groom humiliate her in front of 300 witnesses, and she said nothing in her own defense. Margot faltered. Your Majesty, I'm not finished. Kyle rose from his chair, and the temperature in the room dropped so sharply that Sorrel saw ice crystals forming on the water glasses. You sold her to a man who never intended to honor the match. You let her be publicly denounced as cursed and hollow and worthless. And now you ride 3 days to interfere with her one chance at a life beyond your cruelty? You don't understand what she is, Margot said, but her voice had lost its edge. I understand exactly what she is. Kale's eyes had gone from gray to silver, something ancient and terrible stirring in their depths. The question you should be asking Lady Ashford is whether you understand what I am. Margot went pale. The contract stands, Kale continued. The wedding will take place in 3 days. You and your daughter are welcome to attend as guests, but any further attempt to interfere will be treated as an act of aggression against the crown of Valdrin. He paused, letting the threat settle. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly, Your Majesty. Margot performed a curtsy so shallow it bordered on insult, then turned to leave. But Bryony lingered. Her stepsister approached carefully, hands clasped in front of her, every movement calculated to appear harmless. She was beautiful as always, golden hair, cornflower eyes, the kind of delicate features that made men write poetry. Sorrel, she said softly, may I speak with you privately? Just for a moment? No, Kale said. It's family business, Your Majesty. Bryony's smile was honey over poison. Surely you can allow sisters a moment of... She is no longer your family. Kale moved to stand beside Sorrel, and she felt the cold of him like a shield. She is mine now. Her business is my business. Say what you came to say, or leave. Bryony's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the spite beneath. Very well. She looked at Sorrel with something that might have been pity if it weren't so clearly triumph. I came to warn you, sister. The king seems protective now, but men always lose interest eventually. And when he discovers what you truly are, when he realizes you can never give him what he needs. She smiled sweetly. Well, you know what happens to wives who can't produce heirs. Enough, Kale said. I'm only telling her the truth. Bryony was already backing toward the door, her mission complete. The mate bond requires 2 wolves. She has none. No matter how many times you take her to your bed, Your Majesty, you'll never truly be bonded. She'll never be your real queen. And everyone will know it. She swept out after her mother, leaving poison in her wake. Sorrel sat very still. The advisors had gone quiet, carefully studying their documents. She's wrong, Kyle said after a moment. Sorrel looked up at him. Is she? The mate bond isn't relevant to our arrangement. His voice was clipped, factual. I told you from the beginning, this marriage is contractual. I don't need a bond. I need an heir and a queen who can stand beside me at formal occasions. Your wolf, or lack thereof, changes nothing. But the heir will be conceived the traditional way. Something almost like discomfort crossed his features. The bond would make it more efficient. But it isn't required. We'll manage. We'll manage. Such cold comfort for such an intimate subject. Sorrel should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. Ironic, given the slur that had defined her entire life. Sign the contract, Kyle said quietly. Unless you've changed your mind? Sorrel picked up the quill. Her hand trembled only slightly as she added her name to the parchment. But when she finished, Kale took the quill from her and signed beneath. It's done, the advisor announced. You are legally betrothed. The wedding will proceed as scheduled. Kale nodded once, then turned to leave. Your Majesty, Sorrel called after him. He paused. My stepsister mentioned your private condition. She watched his shoulders tense. I signed the contract. I won't interfere. But I want you to know. Whatever it is, whatever you're hiding. She swallowed hard. I'm hiding something too. We're both broken in our own ways. So maybe that means we understand each other better than most married couples would. Kale stood motionless for a long moment. You're not what I expected, he said finally. I'm not sure yet if that's good or bad. He walked out without looking back. Sorrel sat alone in the cold chamber, the signed contract before her, her future sealed. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until she belonged to a king who couldn't love her, who wouldn't touch her except to produce heirs, who was hiding something so terrible it had been written into their marriage contract. But at least he'd defended her. At least he'd stood between her and her family's cruelty. At least he'd looked at Margot with those terrible silver eyes and made her stepmother afraid for the first time in Sorrel's memory. Cold over cruelty, she thought. I'll take cold over cruelty every time. Outside the chamber windows, snow began to fall, and somewhere in the castle's shadowed depths, something ancient stirred, sensing change on the frozen wind. The Cathedral of Valdren was nothing like the one in Ashford. Where Ashford's cathedral had been warm stone and soft candlelight, this one was carved from black granite veined with silver. The windows were not stained glass but clear crystal, letting in the gray northern light without softening it. The pews were filled with wolves in dark formal attire, their faces pale and watchful. And it was cold. So cold that Sorrel's breath misted before her despite the dozens of braziers burning along the walls. She stood at the entrance in a gown of midnight blue, Kale's colors, the fabric heavy with silver embroidery that caught the light like frost. The seamstress had worked through 2 nights to complete it, and even Sorrel had to admit it was beautiful. Beautiful and utterly foreign to anything she'd worn before. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Every face she passed was a stranger's. Every eye that tracked her held questions she couldn't answer. Why her? What does the king see in a hollow? Is this some elaborate humiliation we haven't yet understood? At the altar, Kale waited. He wore black, as always, but today his formal attire bore the ancient symbols of the Valdren royal line, wolves and frost and something older, something that made the marks on his collar seem less like decoration and more like warnings. His face was the same frozen mask she'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 days. But when she reached him and placed her hand in his, she felt his fingers tighten around hers with something that might have been urgency. "Whatever happens," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear, "do not be afraid." Before she could ask what he meant, the priest began. The ceremony was different from the one she'd almost completed in Ashford. That one had been brief, perfunctory, focused on the legal binding of 2 houses. This one was ancient. The priest spoke in the old tongue, words Sorrel only half understood. He called upon the ancestors. He called upon the wolf spirits. He called upon something else. Something that made the braziers flicker and the shadows deepen. Then came the moment she'd been dreading. "The bonding rite," the priest intoned. "Let the wolves of king and queen recognize each other. Let their spirits meet and merge. Let the bond be forged in the presence of all witnesses." This was it. The moment her secret would be exposed. The bonding rite required both wolves to emerge partially, eyes changing, claws extending, the physical markers of the beast within. It was meant to prove that both parties were true shifters, capable of producing shifter offspring. Sorrel had no wolf to show. She felt the panic rising, felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The crowd was watching. The priest was waiting. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the congregation. "The bonding rite will be modified," he announced, his voice carrying through the cathedral with absolute authority. "My queen's wolf is shy, unused to public displays. We will complete this portion of the ceremony privately." Murmurs rippled through the pews. "Your Majesty," the priest said carefully, "the rite has never been—" "It has now." Kyle's eyes flashed silver, and every wolf in the cathedral flinched. "Unless you'd like to challenge your king on his wedding day." The priest bowed his head. "Of course not, Your Majesty. We shall proceed." Sorrel stood frozen, her hand still clasped in Kale's frozen grip. He'd protected her. Again. Without asking for explanation, without demanding the truth, he'd simply stepped in and rewrote centuries of tradition to keep her secret safe. Why? The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged, formal words about duty and honor and the continuation of bloodlines. Nothing about love, nothing about affection. Exactly what they'd agreed to. When the priest pronounced them wed, the cathedral erupted in polite applause. "You may claim your queen," the priest said. Sorrel braced herself. The claim required a bite, teeth on flesh, a mark that would scar and never fully fade. It was intimate. It was permanent. And it would require her to bare her neck, to reveal skin she'd kept hidden for years. But Cale didn't reach for her throat. Instead, he lifted her hand, the same hand he'd been holding throughout the ceremony, and raised it to his lips. Then, with impossible gentleness, he bit the inside of her wrist. The pain was sharp but brief. She felt his teeth break skin, felt something cold rush into her veins like winter flooding a river, and then it was done. He lifted his head, and she saw her blood on his lips, saw the way his eyes had gone completely silver, inhuman, and ancient. "Mine," he said, and the word resonated with power that made her knees weak. The crowd murmured. This wasn't traditional. The claim should have been on the neck, visible to all, a permanent mark of possession. But Sorel understood. He'd claimed her somewhere she could hide, somewhere she could cover with a sleeve or a bracelet. He'd given her ownership of her own visibility, even in this. "Yours," she whispered back, because the ritual required response. And for just a moment, something flickered in those silver eyes, something almost warm. Then it was gone, and he was releasing her hand, turning to face the crowd with his frozen mask firmly back in place. "The wedding feast awaits," he announced. "My queen and I will join you shortly." The congregation began to file out, still whispering, still confused by the unorthodox ceremony they'd witnessed. Sorrel stood beside her new husband, her wrist throbbing gently where his teeth had marked her. "Why?" she asked quietly. Cale didn't look at her. "Why what?" "The right, the claim. You protected me. You didn't have to. You're my queen now." His voice was flat, factual. "Your humiliation would be my humiliation. It's strategic, nothing more." She didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. Not after seeing that flicker of something in his eyes. "What did you mean before?" she pressed. "When you said not to be afraid?" Cale finally turned to face her, and she saw exhaustion carved into his features. The kind of bone-deep weariness she'd glimpsed in the carriage, now impossible to hide. "The bonding rite," he said slowly. "If we had completed it traditionally, you would have seen what I truly am. What I'm becoming. What are you becoming?" He reached up and touched her face. His fingers were so cold they almost burned. "Something that cannot last," he said quietly. "Something that should not exist." Then he pulled away and walked toward the door. "Come, the feast awaits, and I've expended more energy today than I should have. I need to rest." Sorrel followed, her mind spinning with questions. But as she watched him walk, saw the way he steadied himself against the doorframe for just a moment, saw the slight tremor in his hands, a terrible suspicion began to form. He wasn't just cold. He was dying. The wedding feast passed in a blur of faces and names Sorrel would never remember. She sat beside Cale at the high table, accepting congratulations from nobles whose smiles never reached their eyes, eating food she couldn't taste, drinking wine that did nothing to warm the chill in her bones. Cale barely ate at all. He pushed food around his plate, lifted his goblet to his lips without drinking, spoke only when directly addressed. And every time she looked at him, she saw him growing paler. By the time the feast ended and the servants escorted her to the royal chambers, Sorrel was shaking with a combination of nerves and dread. The room was massive. A fire roared in the hearth, doing little against the cold that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The bed was a monument of dark wood and silver silk, large enough to lose herself in. The servants dressed her in a nightgown of white gossamer, brushed her hair until it fell in dark waves down her back, then bowed and retreated. She was alone. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Sorrel sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in her lap, trying to control her breathing. She'd known this was coming. It was in the contract. She'd agreed to produce an heir, but agreement and reality were very different things. Then the door opened. Cale entered quietly, closing it behind him with a soft click. He'd changed from his wedding clothes into a simple white shirt and dark trousers, his feet bare against the cold stone floor. In the firelight, he looked younger, more vulnerable, almost human. "You're afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. Sorrel lifted her chin. "Should I be?" He approached slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, he stopped a few feet from the bed. "I'm going to tell you something," he said. "And then I'm going to give you a choice." Sorrel waited. "I am not like other shifters." He spoke carefully, each word measured. "My wolf is old. Older than any wolf should be. It was passed down through my bloodline, the same wolf inhabiting king after king, growing more powerful with each generation. That's possible? Possible and terrible." His mouth twisted. "The wolf is too strong now, too ancient. It's consuming me from the inside out, freezing me slowly as it takes over." He held up his hands, and she saw that his fingertips were faintly blue. "I am becoming ice, Sorrel, becoming my wolf entirely. In a few years, perhaps less, there will be nothing human left of me." Sorrel's heart clenched. "Is there no cure?" "None that anyone has found." He lowered his hands. "I chose you because I thought a hollow mate would be safe. Your emptiness, your lack of wolf, I believed it meant I couldn't hurt you, that the cold inside me couldn't spread to someone with nothing inside them to freeze. And now? Now I'm not certain of anything." He moved closer, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. "I want you. I shouldn't. Wanting is dangerous. Feeling is dangerous, but I want you anyway. And I need to know if you want me, knowing what I am." Sorrel stood from the bed. She crossed the distance between them, stopping close enough to feel the cold radiating from his skin like winter wind. "I've been called hollow my entire life," she said quietly. "Empty, worthless, cursed. I've been rejected by 3 grooms, humiliated in public, treated as something broken and shameful." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the chill of him seep into her palm. "But you looked at me when everyone else looked away. You protected me when everyone else attacked. You're telling me you're dying, and all I can think is—" She swallowed hard. "At least you're honest about it. At least you're not pretending to be something you're not." "Sorrel, I want you too," she whispered. "I don't understand why, but I do." Something cracked in his expression. Not much. Just a fracture in the ice. Then his mouth found hers. His lips were cold. Gods, so cold. But the kiss was anything but frozen. It was desperate, hungry, the kiss of a man who had denied himself for too long and finally lost the battle. Sorrel gasped against him, and he swallowed the sound. His hands found her waist, her back, her hair. Everywhere he touched, cold bloomed against her skin, but beneath the cold, she felt heat. Not physical warmth. Something deeper. The fire of wanting, of need, of connection. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed, laying her down with more care than she'd expected from someone so desperate. "Tell me if I hurt you," he said against her throat. "The cold. I can't always control it." "I'm not afraid of cold." She wasn't. She'd been cold her whole life, frozen out of her family, frozen out of society, frozen out of any chance at belonging. His ice was just another kind of cold, and she'd survived worse. His fingers found the straps of her nightgown, sliding them down her shoulders with trembling hands. "You're shaking," Sorrel whispered. I haven't touched anyone in 3 years. His voice was ragged. I was afraid of hurting them, afraid of losing control. And now? He looked at her, and his eyes had gone silver again, the wolf rising to the surface. Now I'm more afraid of dying without ever knowing what this feels like. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. The cold of him seeped into her skin everywhere they touched, chest to chest, hip to hip, thigh to thigh. But instead of freezing her, it seemed to wake something. Something deep inside her that she'd never felt before. A warmth, a presence, a stirring in the emptiness that had defined her entire existence. When they came together, Sorrel cried out, not from pain, though there was that too, but from the sensation of fullness where there had always been void. And Cale made a sound she'd never expected from him, a groan of pure relief, as if her warmth was thawing something that had been frozen for years. They moved together in the firelight, and Sorrel felt the boundaries between them blurring, his cold and her warmth, his wolf and her, whatever she had instead. Something was happening, something neither of them had anticipated. Then Cale stiffened above her, his face contorted with pain. He pulled back, gasping, one hand clutching his chest. "Cale!" Sorrel sat up, reaching for him. "What's wrong?" I felt... He was panting, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "I felt something. In you. Not emptiness. Something else." "What? What do you mean?" But he was already pulling away, stumbling from the bed, his eyes wild with something between fear and wonder. "That's not possible," he whispered. "You're hollow. There shouldn't be anything." He doubled over, clutching his chest again, and this time Sorrel saw frost spreading across his skin. Not just at his fingertips, across his arms, his chest, creeping toward his heart. "Cale, stay back." He held up a hand, and she saw the ice crystals forming in his palm. "When we touched, when we connected, my wolf felt something inside you. Something it recognized. Something it wanted." "What does that mean?" He looked at her with eyes that had gone from silver to white, pure white like fresh snow. "It means you're not empty, Sorrel. There's something inside you. And whatever it is..." He staggered toward the door. "My wolf wants to consume it." He fled the room, leaving Sorrel alone in the tangled sheets, her body still humming with sensation, her mind reeling with horror. She'd always believed she was hollow. What if she'd been wrong? What if something had been sleeping inside her all along? And what if Cale's dying wolf had just woken it up? For 3 days after the wedding night, Cale avoided her. Sorrel took her meals alone. She wandered the castle's frozen corridors alone. She sat in the vast library surrounded by books she couldn't focus on, replaying that night over and over in her mind. Something inside you. My wolf wants to consume it. What did that mean? What was inside her? And she'd been tested as a child, examined by healers and shamans and anyone her father could pay to find her wolf. They'd all agreed. She was empty. A hollow. Born without the spirit that defined their kind. But Cale's wolf had sensed something, and whatever it was, it had terrified him. On the 4th day, she'd had enough of waiting. She found his study by following the trail of cold. Not the general chill of the castle, but something sharper, more intense, the signature of his presence growing stronger as she approached. The door was heavy oak bound with iron. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. "Go away." His voice was muffled, strained. "No." Silence. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. "Please." Sorrel pushed the door open. The study was a disaster. Books lay scattered across the floor. The desk had been overturned. Frost coated every surface, the walls, the ceiling, the shattered remains of what had once been a window. And in the center of it all, Kale sat with his back against the wall, his knees drawn to his chest, his arms wrapped around himself as if trying to hold himself together. Ice covered him. Not just frost, actual ice, climbing up his arms, spreading across his torso, creeping toward his throat. Gods, Sorrel breathed. Kale, I told you to stay away. His teeth were chattering. I'm losing control. The wolf. It tasted something that night. Something in you. And now it won't stop reaching for it. She should have run. Any sane person would have. Instead, she walked toward him. Sorrel, don't... She knelt before him and took his frozen hands in hers. The cold hit her like a physical blow. It raced up her arms, into her chest, toward her heart. She gasped, nearly pulling away. And then something answered. Deep inside her, in the hollow space where her wolf should have been, something stirred. Not a wolf. Something older. Something that recognized the ancient creature trying to consume Kale from within. Heat bloomed from her core. Not normal warmth. Something fiercer, brighter. A flame that had been waiting for fuel. The ice on Kale's hands began to melt. What? He stared at their joined hands, at the steam rising from where cold met heat. What are you doing? I don't know. Sorrel's voice shook. I don't understand what's happening. But she didn't let go. The heat spread through her, pushing back against his cold, creating a bubble of warmth around them both. She watched the ice retreat from his arms, his chest, and his throat. Watched color return to his lips, his cheeks. Watched him breathe without pain for the first time since she'd known him. How? He whispered. I don't know, she said again. But I'm not letting go until you tell me everything. What is happening to you? What is your wolf? And what did it sense inside me? Kale closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were gray once more. Human. Tired. Help me to the couch, he said. This will take some time to explain. She helped him up, guided him to the frost-covered couch, sat beside him as he gathered his strength. The wolf inside me has no name, he began. It existed before names did. The first of our kind carried it, thousands of years ago. When he died, it passed to his son, and to his son's son, and on through the generations until it reached me. An immortal wolf? An immortal hunger. His jaw tightened. It grows stronger with each host, more demanding, more possessive. By the time it came to me, it was already too powerful for any human vessel. My father lasted 32 years before it consumed him entirely. My grandfather, 28. I've made it to 34, but only because I stopped feeling anything. Emotion feeds it. Love, hate, joy, grief. Any strong feeling gives it more power. That's why you said you couldn't love me? That's why I can't afford to feel anything for anyone. He looked at her, and she saw the cost of that discipline in every line of his face. But that night, when we were together, I felt something. For the first time in years, I wanted something beyond mere survival. And my wolf. He shuddered. My wolf tasted something in you that it recognized. Something ancient. Something that might be the only thing in existence older than it is. Sorrel's mouth went dry. What are you saying? I'm saying you're not hollow, Sorrel. You're a vessel. Like me. But whatever sleeps inside you has been dormant so long that no one could sense it. He reached up and touched her face, and his hand was warm now, warm from her heat. Until my wolf called to it. Called to it? Woke it up. His eyes held hers. I don't know what you are. I don't know what's inside you. But I know this. My wolf wants it. And when my wolf wants something, it eventually takes it. Fear should have consumed her. Instead, she felt strangely calm. Then we need to find out what I am, she said. Before your wolf does something we can't undo. That's not your burden to bear. We're married, Kale. She took his hands again, felt the warmth flowing between them. Your burdens are my burdens now. That's what the contract said. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but the absence of cold. The first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. You're unlike anyone I've ever known, he said quietly. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. But for the first time, she heard something in his voice that sounded almost like hope. That night, he came to her chambers. Not for consummation. They were both too shaken for that. But simply to be near her. He lay beside her in the darkness, and she felt his cold slowly easing as her warmth seeped into him. Don't get attached, he murmured against her hair. I'm still dying. So is everyone, she replied. Some of us just have more warning. He laughed. Actually laughed. A rusty sound, unpracticed, but real. I haven't laughed in 3 years, he said. Then you're overdue. She felt him smile against her hair, felt his arm tighten around her waist. This wasn't love. It couldn't be love. He'd told her he couldn't feel it, and she knew better than to hope. But it was something. And as sleep claimed her, Sorrel realized she was no longer afraid of the thing sleeping inside her. She was afraid of what would happen when it fully woke, because whatever it was, it had been waiting for Kale's wolf. And now that they'd found each other, something was about to change forever. 2 months had passed since their wedding night. 2 months of Kale coming to her chambers every evening. 2 months of his cold slowly thawing against her warmth. 2 months of conversations that stretched into the early hours about his kingdom, his fears, his desperate hope that she might somehow save him. 2 months of falling in love with a man who swore he couldn't love her back. Sorrel stood at the window of her chambers, watching snow fall over Valdrin, her hand pressed against her stomach. She was pregnant. The healer had confirmed it that morning, her weathered face breaking into a rare smile. An heir for Valdrin, she'd announced. The king will be pleased. The king would be pleased, because that was what this was about. The contract, the heir, the continuation of his bloodline before the ancient wolf consumed him entirely. She should tell him. She knew she should. But every time she imagined the words, she felt sick with fear. He had what he needed now. An heir growing in her belly, the contract fulfilled. Why would he keep coming to her chambers? Why would he keep holding her through the night, letting her warmth push back his cold? The door opened. Kale entered as he always did, quietly, almost hesitantly, as if still surprised she allowed him in. He looked better than he had 2 months ago. The blue had faded from his fingertips. The ice no longer crept across his skin without warning. Whatever lived inside her, it was keeping his wolf at bay. But she knew it was temporary. She'd seen him studying ancient texts in his study, searching desperately for a permanent solution. She'd heard him talking to his advisors about succession plans, about what would happen when he was gone. He was still dying, just slower now. You're crying, he said, crossing to her. Sorrel touched her cheek. She hadn't realized. Tell me, he said, taking her hands in his. Warm hands now. Hands that had learned to borrow her heat. Whatever it is, tell me. She should have told him about the baby. That was the logical thing, the practical thing. Instead, what came out was, I love you. Kale went very still. I know I shouldn't, Sorrel continued, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I know you said you couldn't feel it, couldn't return it. But I need you to know, before... Her voice broke. I need you to know that these 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide now that I've... What do you mean, now that you've... His eyes dropped to where her hand still pressed against her stomach. Understanding dawned. You're pregnant. Yes. And you think I'll leave now? His voice was strange, rough. You think I only came to you for the air, and now that you're carrying my child, I'll abandon you. Won't you? The words were barely a whisper. You have what you needed. The contract is fulfilled. The contract? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sorrel, I stopped caring about the contract the first night you took my frozen hands and didn't flinch. I stopped caring about heirs and succession the first time you made me laugh. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I love you. The world stopped. What? I love you. He said it again, wonder in his voice, as if hearing the words for the first time himself. I didn't think I could. I thought the wolf had frozen that part of me forever. But you... He pressed his forehead to hers. You thawed me. You found something I thought was dead and you brought it back to life. Joy exploded in her chest. She laughed, she cried. She threw her arms around him and held on as if he might disappear. I love you, she said against his shoulder. I love you. I love you. Kyle made a sound, not a sound of joy, a sound of agony. He wrenched away from her, doubling over, his hands clawing at his chest. Ice erupted across his skin, not the slow creep she'd seen before, but an explosion of frost that covered him in seconds. Kale! His eyes snapped open, and they were white, pure white. The wolf staring out from behind his human face. Run! He gasped. Sorrel, run! But she couldn't move. She watched in horror as ice spread across the floor from where he stood, climbing the walls, coating the windows. The temperature plummeted until her breath came in frozen clouds. What's happening? She screamed. The wolf. He fell to his knees, his body convulsing. It felt the love. It's been starving for emotion, and I fed it everything at once. His back arched. She heard bones cracking, reshaping. Saw his hands elongating into claws, his face stretching into something inhuman. He was shifting, not into a normal wolf, into something ancient and terrible, the primordial beast that had been waiting for centuries to break free. I can't stop it, he howled, his voice already more animal than man. Sorrel, please. Please run before I... He threw his head back and screamed. The sound shattered every window in the chamber. It echoed through the castle, through the mountains, through the very bones of the earth. A scream of rage and hunger and endless, endless cold. Then he collapsed. The ice stopped spreading, the temperature stabilized, and Kyle lay motionless on the frozen floor, frost covering his entire body, his chest no longer moving. Sorrel ran to him, falling to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against his frozen chest. Nothing. No heartbeat. No breath. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She poured her warmth into him as she had before, but this time, nothing happened. The ice didn't melt. His eyes didn't open. Help! She screamed. Someone help me! Guards burst through the door. Servants followed. Everyone stopped in shock at the sight of their king, frozen solid, and their queen kneeling over him, sobbing. Get the healers! Someone shouted. Get everyone! The king is dying. But Sorrel knew healers couldn't fix this. Only she could. And to save him, she would have to become something she'd spent her whole life being told she could never be. 3 days. 3 days of Kale lying frozen in his chambers, surrounded by warming fires that did nothing, attended by healers who could offer no solutions. 3 days of Sorrel refusing to leave his side, pouring every ounce of warmth she had into his frozen form. 3 days of slowly accepting that she wasn't enough. There's nothing more we can do, the chief healer said on the 3rd morning. The ancient wolf has fully emerged. It's protecting itself with ice while it consumes what remains of His Majesty's humanity. Within a week, perhaps less, the king we knew will be gone entirely. No, Sorrel's voice was hoarse from crying. There has to be something. The thing inside me. His wolf recognized it. Maybe I can. With respect, Your Majesty, you are hollow. You have no wolf, no power to. She's not hollow. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Ancient, bent with age, wearing robes of deep crimson that marked her as a keeper of the old ways. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but they fixed on Sorel with unsettling precision. High Priestess Verna, the healer stammered. We didn't summon. I summoned myself. The old woman shuffled into the room, her gaze never leaving Sorel. I felt it 3 days ago. The awakening. The stirring of something that hasn't moved in 1,000 years. Sorel stood, her heart hammering. You know what's inside me? I know what you are, child. Verna stopped before her, reaching up to touch Sorel's face with papery fingers. You carry the first flame. And the primordial fire that existed before wolves, before shifters, before humanity itself. You are the mate the ancient wolf has been seeking since the beginning of time. That's impossible, the healer protested. The first flame is myth. Legend. It doesn't. It exists. Verna's voice cracked like thunder. It has always existed. But 1,000 years ago, a jealous priestess bound it, hid it, and ensured it would sleep until the world ended. Her clouded eyes narrowed. Or until someone woke it. Sorel's mind raced. If I carry this first flame, why did everyone always sense emptiness in me? Because the binding is still in place. Verna turned her gaze to Kale's frozen form. The fire sleeps. It stirs now because the ancient wolf called to it, but it cannot fully wake while the binding holds. Then how do I break it? You must find the one who placed it. Verna's expression darkened. Blood magic requires blood to undo. Whoever bound the first flame inside you used their own essence to seal it. Only by confronting them and taking back what was stolen can you set it free. But the binding was placed 1,000 years ago. That person would be. The binding on the first flame is ancient, yes. But bindings must be renewed each generation, passed from keeper to keeper. Verna's gaze sharpened. Who raised you, child? Who had access to you from birth? The answer hit Sorel like a physical blow. Margot, her stepmother, the woman who had appeared in her father's life when Sorel was barely 3 years old. The woman who had insisted Sorel was cursed, was hollow, was worthless, and the woman who had been present for every test, every examination, and every healer's visit that confirmed Sorel had no wolf inside her. My stepmother, Sorel breathed. She's been binding me my whole life. Then you know what you must do. Verna stepped back. Find her. Confront her. Take back your fire. She looked at Kale. Before the wolf devours what remains of your mate. Sorel turned to the guards. Prepare my horse. I'm riding to Ashford. Your Majesty, in your condition, the healer began. My condition is carrying the only thing that can save my husband. Sorel's hand went to her stomach, to the new life growing there. I won't let my child be born without a father. And I won't let Kyle die because I was too afraid to face the woman who's been lying to me since I was 3 years old. She looked at Kale one more time, at his frozen face, his still chest, and the ice that was slowly, slowly creeping inward toward his heart. I love you, she whispered. Hold on for me. I'm going to save you. Then she ran. The ride to Ashford took 2 days at full gallop. Sorel pushed her horse until it foamed, slept only in brief snatches, ate only what she could consume in the saddle. Every moment she wasted was another moment the ice crept closer to Kale's heart. She arrived at her childhood home as the sun was setting, painting the stone walls in shades of blood and gold. Margot was waiting on the steps, as if she'd known Sorel would come. Stepdaughter. Her voice was honeyed poison, and the same tone she'd used for 20 years. I heard about your husband's unfortunate condition, such a tragedy. Such a... Enough? Sorrel dismounted, her legs shaking with exhaustion but her voice steady. I know what you did. I know what I am. And I know you've been binding the first flame inside me since I was a child. Something flickered in Margot's eyes. Surprise, quickly masked. I have no idea what you're... The High Priestess of Valdrin told me everything. Sorrel climbed the steps, stopping just below her stepmother. Blood magic. Bindings pass through generations. You've been the keeper of this curse, haven't you? Making sure I never knew what I truly was. Margot's mask cracked, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly, honest, real. You want the truth, girl? Fine. She spread her arms. Yes, I bound you. I've been binding you since the day I married your pathetic father, because I was charged with keeping the first flame contained, just as my mother was, and her mother before her. Why? Because the first flame must never unite with the ancient wolf. Margot's voice rose. 1,000 years ago, a priestess had a vision. If fire and ice come together, if the primordial powers merge, they will either save the world or destroy it. My order was tasked with ensuring they never got the chance. So you made me believe I was worthless. Sorrel's fists clenched. You convinced me I was hollow, empty, cursed. I did what was necessary, Margot shouted. Do you have any idea what you are? What you could become? If the first flame fully awakens inside you, there's no telling what. My husband is dying. The words stopped Margot cold. The ancient wolf is consuming him. Sorrel continued, her voice breaking. He's frozen solid, and every hour the ice moves closer to his heart. The only thing that can save him is the fire you've kept locked inside me for 20 years. She stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in her stepmother's eyes. Release the binding. I can't. Can't or won't. Both. Margot lifted her chin. The binding is tied to my life force. The only way to break it is... to kill you? They both turned. Bryony stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling at her sides. I heard everything, she said quietly. I've been listening since you arrived. She looked at her mother with something between horror and grief. You killed father, didn't you? That's why he died so suddenly when Sorrel was 16. He found out what you were doing to her. Margot's expression flickered. Bryony, darling, you don't understand. He left a letter. Bryony's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Hidden in his study. I found it years ago, but I didn't understand it. He wrote about the binding, about the flame, about how he was going to stop you. And then he was dead. He was going to ruin everything. Margot's voice had gone cold. He was going to expose the order, release the flame, and doom us all. I did what I had to do. You murdered my father, Sorrel whispered. I saved the world. No. Sorrel stepped forward, and for the first time she felt something stir inside her. Not the gentle warmth she'd shared with Kale. Something fiercer, angrier. You saved yourself. You kept power you had no right to keep. And you let me suffer my entire life because you were too afraid of what I might become. Heat bloomed in her chest. Her hands began to glow. Margot's eyes went wide. That's not possible. The binding is breaking. Sorrel looked at her hands, at the flames licking between her fingers without burning her. You said it was tied to your life force, but I don't need to kill you to take it back. She reached out and grabbed Margot's wrist. The binding snapped. Not gently. Violently. Like a chain shattering under unbearable pressure. Sorrel felt it rush through her, the full force of the first flame roaring to life after 1,000 years of sleep. Fire erupted around her. Not destructive fire. Transformative fire. Burning away everything false. Everything that had been used to contain her. Margot screamed, knee collapsing as the binding that had sustained her for decades was ripped away. She aged before their eyes, 40, 50, 60 years catching up in seconds as the stolen life force returned to its rightful owner. Sorrel! Bryony cried out, shielding her face from the heat. You have to control it. But Sorrel didn't want to control it. She wanted to unleash it. She wanted to burn away every lie, every cruelty, and every year of believing she was worthless. Then she remembered. Kyle, her husband, her mate. The man frozen in Valdrin waiting for her to save him. Sorrel closed her eyes and pulled the fire inward. It fought her. The first flame was wild, untamed, and furious at being contained for so long. But she was stronger. She was its vessel, its home, and she would not let it destroy the world she was trying to save. Slowly, the inferno subsided. The flames retreated into her skin, into her bones, into the hollow space that had never been hollow at all. When she opened her eyes, Margot lay unconscious on the ground, ancient and withered but alive. And Bryony was staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror. Go, Bryony whispered. Save your king. I'll deal with her. Sorrel nodded once. Then she mounted her horse and rode. She reached Valdrin 2 days later, at dawn. The castle was silent as she ran through the corridors, her body blazing with barely contained power. Servants pressed against walls to let her pass, their eyes wide at the flames dancing across her skin. She burst into Cale's chambers. He looked worse. The ice had spread completely, covering him from head to toe, only his face still visible beneath the frost. His lips were blue. His skin was white as snow, but she could still feel him. Through the mate bond that had formed without either of them realizing, through the connection between fire and ice that had existed since the beginning of time, she could feel him fighting. I'm here, she said, climbing onto the bed beside him. I found it. I found me. She placed her hands on his frozen chest and let the first flame loose. Fire poured out of her, not destructive fire, but primordial fire, the heat that had existed before the sun. It crashed against the ancient ice, and for a terrible moment she felt them war against each other. Then something shifted. The flames didn't destroy the ice, they merged with it. She felt the ancient wolf recognize its counterpart, the fire it had been seeking, the flame it had been calling to across centuries. And instead of consuming, and instead of devouring, it submitted. The ice began to melt, not into water, into light. Pure, brilliant light that filled the chamber and spilled out the windows, visible for miles in every direction. Cale gasped. His eyes flew open, gray eyes, human eyes, warm eyes, and he looked at her with wonder. Sorrel? I'm here. She was laughing and crying at once. I'm here. I've got you. And you're safe. He sat up slowly, looking at his hands. Hands that were no longer frozen. Hands that radiated gentle warmth instead of killing cold. The wolf, he said slowly. It's still there, but it's quiet, peaceful. He looked at her with dawning understanding. What did you do? I woke up. She took his hands in hers, and where they touched, fire and ice danced together in perfect harmony. I was never empty, Kyle. When I was carrying the other half of your soul, the flame to your frost, we were always meant to find each other. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her. A real kiss, warm and desperate and full of everything he'd been afraid to feel. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you too. She pulled back to look at him. And I have more news. She took his hand and pressed it against her stomach. Cale's breath caught. The baby. Is it still growing? Still safe? She smiled through her tears. Our child will carry both fire and ice, the first of a new bloodline, the first generation in 1,000 years that won't be cursed. He kissed her again, and again, and again, until she lost count. Outside, the sun rose over Valdrin, warming the kingdom for the first time in centuries. 6 months later. And the throne room was filled with more warmth than it had seen in generations. Sorrel sat beside Kale, her hand resting on her swollen belly, watching as petitioners came and went. The court that had once been cold and silent now buzzed with life, with laughter, with hope. So much had changed. Margot had been tried for murder and conspiracy. She now spent her final years in a tower cell, stripped of power, stripped of dignity, left with nothing but the weight of her crimes. Bryony had been granted clemency for her help in exposing the truth. She now served as an ambassador between Valdrin and Ashford, working to heal the wounds their family's secrets had caused. The order that had kept the First Flame bound for generations had been dissolved. In its place, Sorrel had established an academy, a place where those born with unusual gifts could learn to control them instead of being taught to fear them. And Kale? Kale smiled now, laughed, reached for her hand in public, kissed her cheek before court sessions, spoke of their future as if he actually believed he would live to see it. Because he would. The ancient wolf and the first flame had found their balance. Neither would consume their host. Neither would demand sacrifice. They existed in harmony, fire and ice, together as they were always meant to be. "You're thinking too loud," Kyle murmured, leaning close. "I can practically hear it." "I'm thinking about how happy I am." Sorrel turned to look at him. "Is that allowed?" "Encouraged, actually." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "My queen should always be happy." "Your queen is deliriously happy." She took his hand and pressed it against her belly, where their daughter kicked enthusiastically. "Your daughter, however, is restless. She takes after her mother. She takes after both of us." Sorrel smiled. Fire and ice, stubborn and determined. Doomed to rule the world. Destined to change it. They sat in comfortable silence as the court bustled around them. A year ago, Sorrel had stood at an altar in Ashford, prepared to bind herself to a man who despised her, believing she was worthless, empty, cursed. Now she sat on a throne beside a man who loved her beyond reason, carrying a child who would grow up knowing she was extraordinary, surrounded by a kingdom that had learned to hope again. She had been told her whole life that she was hollow. She had been wrong, she had been waiting, and the wait had been worth it. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. Your comments mean more than you know. Until next time.